So, Max Cámara 5, A Body in Barcelona, which I think at the time when I was writing it, I was calling The One and the Two. Okay, title, I think A Body in Barcelona in this case is probably a better option. So, another good Max Cámara novel, and actually there are a few interesting things that I'd like to point out about this novel, or a few things that I was struck by as I was reading it, rereading it now. Firstly, I think it's the fact that I've gone for a multiple point of view for this. It's the first of the novels where I've done that. The first four novels, we're inside Max's head and we're seeing everything from Max's perspective. Whereas with this novel, I decided to change things a bit and break out from that and go for a multiple point of view. And that was really interesting. And I remember being very stimulated by that. And I can feel that in the pages of the book as I'm reading it, that it's fun. It's really fun to get inside the heads of other characters, particularly your bad guys, to sort of play around with that psychology and sort of get inside their minds. In some ways, writing can be a bit like acting. I think it's, you're playing the parts, you're inside these people as you're writing about them or writing from their perspective in this instance. So that was great. There are about 4, 5, maybe even 6 different points of view in this novel. We've got Max, obviously, but then we've got these other characters. And interestingly, perhaps most interestingly, a young 16, 17-year-old boy called Didak, who is an anarchist and has appeared in the previous Max Cámara novel, Blood Med. He had a sort of walk-on role there. He and his father, Daniel, who then become big players in this novel. And again, I'd forgotten all about this, and so it was really refreshing to come back and read that and discover everything that I'd been doing and thinking about that. And also, we kind of move outside, as the title suggests. We move outside of Valencia. We start in Valencia, obviously, because that's where Max is based. But then we end up going to Ceuta, which is this rather curious Spanish enclave, or an exclave, I think it is technically, on the North African coast, just across the Strait of Gibraltar from Gibraltar. And it's kind of, I remember visiting Ceuta years ago or years before, when I'd been researching my book on the Spanish Civil War, Guerra. And it was a very curious little place, actually, very military, lots of soldiers there. You're right on the border with Morocco, and there's this interesting kind of land border there between Spain and Morocco, and sort of between the first and the third worlds. And I've crossed that border a few times myself, and it's really amazing, that shift that you get from this sort of rural Moroccan society on the one hand, on the sort of southern side of that border, and then you sort of cross over into sort of modern European city, almost, it's a sort of town really, but it's Ceuta, but on the other side. So that's really interesting, and I kind of use that knowledge in this book. There's quite a sort of dramatic scene right there on the border, involving somebody who's trying to escape from Max, and Max manages to sort of dive into the ocean and grab him and arrest him. So that's really interesting. And then we go to Barcelona, and obviously, as the title suggests, a lot of this book is about Barcelona. And the backdrop to this, it's interesting. I was writing this novel in 2014, I think, and it was based around a sort of political situation in which Catalonia was about to declare independence. And I was sort of playing around with that possibility in my mind and wondering not what would happen with what the Catalans would do, but how the Spanish state would react and what would happen to try and prevent that from happening. What the Spanish state would do to try and stop Catalan nationalism in its tracks and prevent a declaration of independence. And looking at the history of Spain, basically the suggestion, in my mind, was very clear that they would use force, they would use physical violence to bring that to a halt. And so I kind of played with that idea, and that's pretty much what happens in the novel. And what's interesting is that 3 years later, in 2017, that's exactly what happened. Catalonia held a referendum which was declared illegal by Madrid. A majority of people who voting in the referendum voted for independence, and then the Spanish state just sort of cracked down. They sent the police in and they were just beating people up in the streets. And I was in Barcelona. I remember I was in Barcelona on the day that the Spanish state cancelled or suspended Catalan autonomy and kind of imposed direct rule from Madrid. I remember that it was a very curious day, very heightened tensions. And actually it was that day and everything that was happening around me and the group of people I was with that day that sowed the seed of a book that I later wrote, which in the UK was called Violencia, and in the US it's called Why Spain Matters, and it's a history of Spain. And that seed was sown that day when the Spanish state in Madrid suspended Catalan autonomy, and that was all on this backdrop of Catalan independence moves. And it was quite extraordinary for me to be there as all this was going on, because I'd been writing about it in fictional format only 3 years before. So it's quite curious to see how that was being played out, and how quite a few of the predictions that I'd made, I didn't know, I wasn't aware that I was making predictions when I was writing A Body in Barcelona, but it turned out that a lot of the scenarios that I was playing out in that novel then actually happened in real life 3 years later. So that was really quite curious. Anyway, I'm really happy with this novel, another really good Max Cámara novel. I think it's great to be rereading them. And there's just one more to go. A Fatal Sunset. So I'll be doing a video about that and filling you in on everything, the kind of complex story behind how that novel came to be written. I'll be doing that in a separate video, just to remind you that we only have a few days, like 3 days left, I think now, of the campaign to bring back Max in 2023. So if you can follow the links and support as much as you can, I'm hugely grateful to everybody who's already pledged. And please, we can bring back Max in 2023. Thank you very much. Thank you.